My entire life had led to the closed oak door in front of me, where my future as police commissioner waited. But before I could walk through it, one officer decided my accent made me fair game. The leather of the chair was cold against the back of my neck, a stark contrast to the slow, simmering heat building in my stomach. I smoothed down the front of my navy blue power suit for the 10th time, the fabric crisp and unfamiliar. For 25 years, my uniform had been different, less tailored, more practical, designed for the streets, not the polished mahogany corridors of City Hall. Today was different. Today was the culmination of everything. My entire life, it seemed, had been a long, winding road leading to the closed oak door in front of me. Behind it, the mayor, the press, and my future were waiting. My mother always told me my voice was a melody, a blend of the island lilt she'd carried with her from Trinidad and the sharp, no-nonsense cadence of the city that had raised me. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for the music in your mouth, Amara," she'd say, her own accent a warm, comforting blanket. "It is the sound of your strength. It is the story of where you come from." I held on to that thought, my fingers tracing the outline of the silver locket she'd given me, tucked just beneath my collar. The nerves were a frantic hummingbird beating against my ribs, but her voice, my voice, was my anchor. The waiting area was sterile and quiet, save for the hushed typing of a secretary at a large, imposing desk and the distant, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. It felt like a countdown to a new era, not just for me, but for the entire city's police force. A force I was about to lead, a force that desperately needed to change. The silence was broken by the squeak of polished leather shoes and the jangle of keys. A police officer sauntered in, his chest puffed out with the kind of unearned confidence that often came with a badge on a gun. He was tall, with a thick neck and a face that looked permanently flushed. He slapped a manila folder onto the secretary's desk. "Morning, Janice. Got those preliminary reports for the chief?" "The chief is in with the mayor," she replied, without looking up. "You can leave them." He leaned against her desk, making himself comfortable in a way that clearly made her uncomfortable. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. They swept over my suit, my carefully styled braids, and the determined set of my jaw. A slow smirk spread across his lips. He clearly didn't recognize me. To him, I was just a civilian, a black woman in a fancy suit waiting for an appointment, an outsider. "Well now," he said, his voice a low drawl that was meant to be charming, but landed somewhere near predatory. "Don't see many folks dressed up like you around here, unless they're in trouble." I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. "I'm not in trouble, officer." My voice, calm and measured, filled the small space. The accent, the melody my mother spoke of, was unmistakable. His smirk widened into a grin. It wasn't a friendly one. It was the grin of a man who's just found something to play with. "Oh, you're not from around here, are you, sweetheart?" He tilted his head, his eyes crinkling in mock curiosity. "Where's that accent from? Jamaica? Let me guess, you're here to file a complaint about the music being too loud in your neighborhood." The secretary, Janice, finally looked up, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. She knew a storm was brewing. I, however, remained perfectly still. I had spent a career learning to control my emotions, to turn anger into strategy. This man, this officer, had no idea that he was a living, breathing example of the very thing I was here to dismantle. The casual disrespect, the immediate assumption of otherness, the condescending pet name. He was a textbook case study. "I am from this city, officer," I replied, my tone level, professional. "Born and raised." "Is that right?" He chuckled, a dismissive, grating sound. He pushed off the desk and took a step closer to me. He was trying to intimidate me, using his physical presence to assert dominance. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms. I could read his name tag clearly, Miller. Another mental note. Badge number 714. Another mental note. "Oh, funny," he continued, ignoring the warning glance from Janice. "You sound like you just got off a banana boat.
"What was that you said?" He cupped a hand to his ear and leaned forward, his face a caricature of confusion. Then he straightened up and, in a horribly mangled, high-pitched imitation of my accent, he said, "I am from this city, man, born and raised." He laughed loudly, looking back at Janice for approval. She stared down at her keyboard, her face pale. The cold fire in my gut began to smolder. I thought of all the complaints I had read in the internal affairs files, reports from citizens, mostly black and brown, detailing encounters just like this one. Officers who saw their accent, their skin color, as a punchline or a threat. Men like Miller, who felt untouchable. I didn't move, I didn't flinch, I just held his gaze. My silence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. His laughter faltered, and his bravado curdled into something uglier. He saw my lack of reaction not as discipline, but as a challenge. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he sneered. "Or you just don't understand plain English? Look, lady, whatever your problem is, I'm sure we can handle it." He put a strange emphasis on the last words, and the implication was chilling. I slowly uncrossed my legs and placed my hands on my knees, leaning forward just slightly. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. "Officer Miller, I understand you perfectly." The use of his name surprised him. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" I said simply, "It's on your uniform. And I can assure you I have no problem, but I'm beginning to think this department does." His face hardened, the flush deepening to a dark, angry red. He was no longer playing. This was a direct affront to his authority. He took another step, his shadow falling over me. "You watch your mouth," he hissed, his voice dropping to a low threat. "You have no idea who you're talking to."
Oh, the irony. It was so thick, I could taste it. I almost smiled. My mother's words echoed in my head once more. "The sound of your strength." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting him stew in his own blustering rage. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. It was 9 o'clock. Time. Just as he opened his mouth to say something else, something I was sure would be career-ending, the grand oak door behind me swung open. A man in a tailored gray suit, the mayor's chief of staff, stepped out. He looked flustered, holding a folder and a ceremonial sash. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over Officer Miller as if he were a piece of furniture, and landed squarely on me. A wave of relief washed over his face. "There you are," he said, his voice ringing with authority. He strode towards me, his hand extended. "We were getting worried. The mayor is ready for you. It's time for the swearing in, Commissioner Adewale." The blood drained from Officer Miller's face so fast I thought he might faint. His mouth hung slightly open, the sneer frozen and then melting away into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, which had been filled with such smug disdain just seconds before, were now wide with dawning horror. He looked from the chief of staff, David, back to me, then back to David again, as if his brain was a faulty machine, unable to compute the reality it was being presented. The swagger evaporated from his posture, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his monumental error crushed him. The title, Commissioner, hung in the air between us, shimmering with a terrible, beautiful power. I rose slowly from the chair, the motion deliberate and fluid. I was no longer the woman waiting. I was the woman they were waiting for. I met Miller's panicked gaze and held it for a single charged beat. I didn't need to say a word. In that one moment of silence, he understood everything. He understood that the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been geologically overturned. He understood that the anonymous black woman whose accent he'd so gleefully mocked now held his entire career in the palm of her hand. "Thank you, David," I said.
my voice resonating with a newfound authority that even I was just settling into. My accent was clear, musical, and unapologetic. I'm ready. I extended my hand to David, but I didn't break eye contact with Miller until the last possible second. As I turned to walk towards the mayor's office, I saw Janice, the secretary. She was staring at Miller, a slow, vindicated smile playing on her lips. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small act of solidarity, but in that moment, it felt like a cheer from a stadium. The walk through that oak door was like crossing a threshold into another life. The quiet waiting room gave way to a flurry of activity. The mayor's office was packed. Cameras flashed, their bright bursts momentarily blinding me. Reporters stood with microphones poised. City council members and high-ranking police officials, the very chiefs and captains who would now report to me, stood respectfully. They saw a woman in a power suit. They saw their new boss. They had no idea that their new boss had just been compared to someone fresh off a banana boat by one of their own. Mayor Thompson, a man whose political savvy was matched only by his ambition, greeted me with a warm handshake and a practiced smile. "Amara," he boomed, "welcome. The city is ready for you." I was escorted to a podium, flanked by the American flag and the city flag. The ceremony was a blur of formal language and solemn promises. I placed my left hand on a Bible held by my tearful older brother, raised my right, and faced the mayor. "I, Amara Adewale," he began, and I repeated after him, my voice steady, my accent ringing through the ornate room. "Do solemnly swear." As I recited the oath, promising to uphold the law, to protect and serve, the image of Officer Miller's mocking face flashed in my mind. Every word I spoke was a direct repudiation of him and everything he represented. I was swearing to protect the citizens he belittled. I was swearing to uphold the very laws he felt were beneath him. The melody of my voice, the sound of my strength, filled the room and was broadcast live across the city. There was no hiding it, no softening it. It was me. After the applause died down, I gave my first speech. It wasn't long, but every word was chosen with care. "This badge," I said, looking out at the sea of faces, "is not a license for authority. It is a covenant of trust. A trust that has been broken for too many in our city. From this day forward, accountability will not be a buzzword. It will be our mandate. Respect will not be optional. It will be our standard. And any officer who believes they are above the community they serve will find that they are no longer welcome in this department." The cameras flashed again, capturing the hard, determined set of my jaw. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of meetings, handshakes, and briefings. It wasn't until well past 10 o'clock at night that I finally stepped into my new office. It was enormous, with a panoramic window that offered a breathtaking view of the glittering city skyline. My city, the city I was now sworn to protect. I sank into the large leather chair behind the mahogany desk, the silence a welcome relief. For the first time all day, I was alone with my thoughts. I thought about Miller. It would be so easy to make an example of him, fire him, ruin him. But that was too simple. Firing one man wouldn't cure the disease. It would only treat a single symptom. Miller wasn't an anomaly. He was a product of a culture, a deep-seated rot that I now had to excise. My fight was bigger than one ignorant cop. My new aide, a bright-eyed and commendably nervous young officer named Davies, knocked gently on the door. "Commissioner, I'm sorry to disturb you. Is there anything else you need before I head out?" I looked at the city lights, each one a home, a life, a story. My work was just beginning. "Yes, Officer Davies," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the full weight of my new position. "I have my first official directive for you. I want you to pull the complete personnel files, including all commendations and civilian complaints, for every single officer assigned to the 17th Precinct."
Davis's eyes widened slightly. The 17th? Miller's precinct. It had a reputation for being a tight-knit boys' club, notorious for its aggressive tactics and a shockingly high number of unsubstantiated brutality complaints. It was a hornet's nest. My first act was to walk right up and kick it. "Yes, Commissioner," he said, scribbling furiously in his notepad. "I'll have them on your desk first thing in the morning." He started to turn, eager to carry out his first order from the new boss. "One more thing, Davies," I called out, stopping him in the doorway. He turned back, his expression attentive. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the polished surface of the desk. The city lights reflected in my eyes, but the memory I was seeing was dark. "I also want you to go down to the archives. Find the cold case file on the unsolved homicide of Detective James Adewale, badge number 429. Davis froze, his pen hovering over the paper. The name registered, the connection clicking into place in his mind. He looked at me, a question dawning in his eyes, a flicker of understanding at the deep personal fire that had driven me to this very desk. "That was my father's badge number," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He was murdered 20 years ago. The case was handled by the 17th Precinct." A shadow seemed to pass over Officer Davis's face. It was the moment he realized I wasn't just a reformer with a political agenda. I was a daughter with a vendetta. His posture straightened, the youthful eagerness in his eyes replaced by a sober professionalism. He knew this wasn't just about policy anymore. This was personal. "Yes, Commissioner," he said, his voice now hushed with a new kind of respect. "The 17th Precinct. Detective James Adewale. I'll retrieve it myself." He gave a sharp nod and disappeared into the hallway, leaving me alone with the ghosts of the past and the crushing weight of the future. The skyline blurred as my eyes unfocused. 20 years. For 20 years, my father's murder had been a gaping wound in my family. He was a good cop, one of the few black detectives in a department rife with prejudice. He believed in the shield, in the promise of justice it represented. He was investigating a string of armed robberies tied to a powerful local syndicate when he was killed. 2 shots to the chest in a dark alley, his service weapon still holstered. The official report called it a robbery gone wrong. The case was assigned to his own precinct, the 17th. And then it went cold. Files were misplaced. Witnesses changed their stories or vanished. The leads dried up into a fine dust that settled over my life, choking out the light. My mother always said there was more to it. "They let him die, Amara," she'd whisper late at night, her voice thick with a grief that never faded. His own brothers in blue, they let him die because he was getting too close to something they didn't want found. I had joined the force to prove her wrong. I wanted to believe in the system, in the fundamental goodness of the badge my father wore with such pride. But the deeper I got, the more I saw. The casual racism, the us versus them mentality, the blue wall of silence that was thicker and more impenetrable than any prison wall. I saw men like Miller everywhere. I realized my mother wasn't just grieving, she was telling the truth. The next morning, 2 stacks of files sat on my desk. One was thick with the personnel records of the 17th Precinct. The other was a single, dusty accordion file, its corners frayed, the label yellowed with age. Adewale, James, homicide, case 78942. I ran my fingers over my father's name. It felt like touching a tombstone. I started with the 17th Precinct. I spent the entire day and most of the night poring over the records. A pattern emerged, ugly and undeniable. A disproportionate number of excessive force complaints, almost all from minority residents. A suspiciously high rate of case dismissals for insufficient evidence, and a core group of officers whose names appeared again and again. commendations for valor that, on closer inspection, were often awarded for raids that ended in civilian casualties. The precinct was a fortress run by a clannish group of senior officers who protected their own and punished outsiders. And then I saw the name, Captain Frank O'Connell. He was the precinct commander, a decorated veteran lauded by the press as a tough-on-crime hero. His name was on nearly every commendation, and, I discovered, he was the lead detective assigned to my father's murder case 20 years ago. The very man responsible for finding his killer, the man who let it go cold. My blood ran ice cold. The other name that leaped off the page was Officer Robert Miller, badge number 714, my greeter from yesterday. His file was a masterpiece of mediocrity, punctuated by moments of sheer brutality. Multiple civilian complaints, all dismissed. 2 internal reviews for excessive force, both cleared. He was O'Connell's protege, his golden boy. He'd been a rookie when my father was killed, but he was there, part of the culture, steeped in it. I finally turned to my father's case file. My hands trembled as I opened it. The contents were sparse. Crime scene photos that I forced myself to look at, a preliminary coroner's report, a few typed pages of witness interviews, most of them vague and contradictory. It was a joke, a deliberate, calculated burial of a case. But tucked into a sleeve at the back of the file, I found something that didn't belong. A small black evidence bag. Inside was a single, tarnished silver cufflink, shaped like a small lion's head. It wasn't my father's. I knew all of his jewelry. The evidence log listed it as item number 12, unidentified cufflink, found near the victim's body. There were no notes about it being processed, no follow-up. It was just there, forgotten, or, more likely, hidden. For the next week, I worked methodically. I initiated a full-scale audit of the 17th Precinct's evidence locker and case files, citing department-wide reform protocols. I brought in a team from internal affairs that I trusted, outsiders who owed no allegiance to the old guard. O'Connell and his cronies were furious, but they couldn't stop me. I was the commissioner. The pushback was immense. Anonymous threats appeared on my car. Whispers followed me down the hallways. The police union president publicly decried my witch hunt. I ignored it all. While the audit was underway, I focused on the cufflink. It was my only tangible lead. I sent a high-resolution photo of it to a contact I had, a high-end jeweler in the city's most exclusive district, a man who owed me a favor from an old case. 2 days later, he called me on my private line. "Commissioner," he said, his voice hushed, "that cufflink, it's unique, custom-made. There's only one set in the world like it. It was part of a limited run I did for a private club about 25 years ago." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What club?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "A private fraternal organization," he said hesitantly, "very exclusive, mostly cops and city officials. They called themselves the Pride." The Pride, a name that dripped with arrogance. "Do you have a membership list?" "God, no," he said quickly. "They were discreet, paid in cash. But I remember the man who commissioned them. He was a young cop back then, but a real hotshot, ambitious, always wore a pinky ring."
A cold dread washed over me. I knew that ring. I had seen it just last week, glinting on the hand of a man who was fighting my audit every step of the way, the union president. "What was his name?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "Donovan," the jeweler said. "Pat Donovan." Pat Donovan, the head of the police union, the man who was leading the charge against me, calling me a traitor to the badge. It didn't make sense. But as I dug deeper, a horrific picture began to form. Donovan, O'Connell, and a handful of other senior officers had all started as rookies together. They were the original members of the Pride, a secret society within the force. They weren't just a boys' club, they were a conspiracy. And I realized my father hadn't just been investigating a crime syndicate. He had been investigating them. My first move was to quietly transfer Officer Miller out of the 17th. I didn't fire him. I reassigned him to the most soul-crushing dead-end job in the entire department, guarding the door to the city impound lot in the middle of nowhere. It was a message, to him and to O'Connell. It said, "I haven't forgotten you. You are not untouchable." The day the transfer order went through, Captain O'Connell himself appeared in my office doorway. He didn't knock. He was a bull of a man, with a florid face and eyes like chips of ice. He closed the door behind him, the click echoing in the silent room. "Commissioner," he began, his voice a low growl, "you're making a mistake." "Am I, Captain?" I asked, not looking up from the file I was reading, my father's file. "You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong, stirring up trouble. Some things are better left in the past." I finally looked up, meeting his cold stare. "My father is in the past, Captain. Does that mean I should leave him there?" A flicker of something, was it fear, crossed his face before being replaced by rage. He took a step towards my desk. "Your father was a good cop, but he got in over his head. He didn't understand how this city works." "Enlighten me," I said, my voice dangerously soft. He leaned forward, placing his thick hands on my desk. He was trying to intimidate me, the same way Miller had. "This department takes care of its own," he hissed. "You come after one of us, you come after all of us. You need to stop this audit, and you need to leave the Adewale case buried." His eyes locked on the open file on my desk, on the evidence bag containing the Silver Lion cufflink. His gaze lingered on it for a half-second too long. A sudden, terrifying thought clicked into place. The jeweler had said there was only one set of cufflinks. He didn't say only one cufflink. Somewhere out there was a matching lion's head. Just then, my private line buzzed. It was Davies. I put him on speaker. "What is it, Davies?" I asked, my eyes never leaving O'Connell's. "Commissioner, you're not going to believe this," Davies said, his voice crackling with excitement. "The audit team found something, hidden in the back of the 17th's old evidence locker, behind a false wall. It's a box of unofficial files. It looks like a shadow ledger. Records of payoffs, witness intimidation, it's all here. And, Commissioner," he paused for dramatic effect, "we also found the missing murder weapon from your father's case." O'Connell's face went white. "That's not all, ma'am," Davies continued, his voice dropping. "There was something else in the box, something personal. It was wrapped in an old cloth, tucked in the bottom." "What was it, Davies?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "It's a silver cufflink, ma'am, shaped like a lion's head, and it's engraved on the back with the initials F.O. The air in the office became thick and heavy, charged with 20 years of silence. F.O., Frank O'Connell. The initials hung between us, an invisible, damning indictment. O'Connell's face, which had been a mask of rage, crumbled into a portrait of a cornered animal. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a waxy pale sheen. His eyes, those chips of ice, darted from the phone to my face, then back to the empty evidence bag on my desk that had once held its twin. He had seen the cufflink. He knew. "It's a lie," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. The blustering captain was gone, replaced by a desperate man staring into the abyss. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the suffocating silence. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of stillness that comes after a violent storm. "A Frank?" I asked, using his first name for the first time. The intimacy was a weapon. The cufflink was found with my father's murder weapon.
In your precinct's evidence locker, hidden behind a false wall with a ledger of your criminal enterprise. Who exactly do you think is framing you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. For 20 years, he had been untouchable, protected by the very system my father had died trying to honor. He was a king in his own corrupt kingdom, and he had just watched his castle walls, built on a foundation of lies and silence, get bulldozed. "Davies," I said into the speakerphone, my voice clear and cold as steel. "Secure that evidence. Have a team from the district attorney's office meet you at the 17th, and send a unit to my office immediately." "Yes, Commissioner," Davies' voice crackled back, crisp and efficient.
The click of the disconnected call was like the cocking of a hammer. O'Connell stared at me, his breathing ragged. The hunter had become the prey. "You," he spat, the venom returning, fueled by desperation. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you've just started. The pride. We built this city. We run this department. You ran it," I corrected him softly, "into the ground. You and Pat Donovan and the rest of your so-called pride. You're not lions. You're jackals, preying on the very people you swore to protect. My father saw it. He was going to expose you, wasn't he? That's why you killed him." His silence was his confession. The story pieced itself together in my mind, a grim mosaic of greed and fear. My father, the good detective, must have stumbled upon their shadow ledger. He found proof of their extortion racket, of their conspiracy to control the city from the shadows. He had trusted his brothers in blue, had likely confronted one of them. And for that trust, they executed him in an alley and buried the truth for 20 years. O'Connell, as the lead detective, had ensured the case would never be solved. He had hidden the evidence, the weapon, and his own incriminating cufflink, which must have come off in the struggle, and authored the cover-up himself. The wail of a distant siren began to cut through the city hum, growing closer with each passing second. It was the sound of justice, long overdue. O'Connell lunged. It wasn't a calculated move, but the last frantic act of a drowning man. He didn't come for me. He lunged for the window, the massive panoramic pane of glass that overlooked the city he believed he owned. For a horrifying second, I thought he was going to throw himself through it. Instead, his fist smashed against the glass, not breaking it, but striking it with a thunderous boom that reverberated through the office. "This is my city," he roared, his voice cracking with a manic fury. He turned back to me, his eyes wild. "You're a diversity hire, a woman with a chip on her shoulder. You're not fit to wear the badge, let alone lead us." The office doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers, young, alert, and loyal not to the old guard, but to their new commissioner, entered with their hands on their holsters. They saw the scene, the shattered composure of the captain, the icy calm of their leader, and understood immediately. "Captain O'Connell," one of the officers said, his voice firm, "you need to come with us." O'Connell just stared at me, his chest heaving. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a hollow, echoing defeat. As the officers cuffed him and read him his rights, the same rights he had denied my father, my eyes fell on the nameplate on my desk. Commissioner Amara Adewale. The melody of my voice, the story of where I came from, had become the sound of his downfall. The fallout was a hurricane. The unsealing of the shadow ledger implicated over a dozen high-ranking officers, including the union president, Pat Donovan. The Pride was dismantled, its members arrested and charged with everything from racketeering and obstruction of justice to conspiracy to commit murder. The story dominated the news for weeks. The department was gutted, cleansed by a fire I had started. I didn't stop there.
I used the momentum to push through the most radical reforms the city had ever seen. New use of force policies, mandatory bias training, a civilian oversight board with real power. We rebuilt the department from the ground up, promoting new leaders who understood that trust was earned, not demanded. And what of Officer Miller? I saw him once more. A few months after O'Connell's arrest, I paid a visit to the city impound lot. He was there, standing by the gate, his uniform looking too big for him, the swagger gone, replaced by the dull sheen of resignation. He saw my car pull up and stiffened, his face a mixture of fear and humiliation. I got out and walked over to him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a patch of cracked asphalt. "Miller," I said. "Commissioner," he mumbled. "You know, I could have fired you that first day," I said, my voice even. "I could have destroyed your career with a single phone call, and you would have deserved it." He flinched, but remained silent. "But I'm not Frank O'Connell," I continued. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. You're going to stay here. And every single day, when you look at these cars, stolen, crashed, taken as evidence from a crime, you're going to remember that you are not above the people you serve. You're going to remember that a person's accent doesn't determine their worth. You're going to learn humility. And maybe, one day, you'll be worthy of the badge again." I left him there, a small man in a vast lot of broken things. He was a symptom of the disease I was trying to cure, and his fate was a lesson, not a punishment. That evening, I visited my mother. I brought her a framed copy of the newspaper. The headline read, "Commissioner Adewale brings father's killers to justice." She held it in her hands, her fingers tracing my face, then the headline. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but for the first time in 20 years, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. "Your father would be so proud, Amara," she whispered, her own beautiful, melodic accent filling the warm space of her kitchen. I looked out her window at the city lights, the same view from my office, but softer, more intimate. It wasn't just my city anymore. It was my father's city. And finally, after all these years, it was a city where justice had a voice, and it spoke with an accent they would never, ever mock again.